Let's move on to the fourth and probably most important topic of the day. And our fourth and probably most important topic of the day comes to us from Giovanni G. Good name, Giovanni. Greetings, fellow Giovanni. Like Rob, I've been waiting anxiously for a No Time to Die trailer. And as I was looking around for information, I came across a report that said James Bond is actually going to be getting married in this one. Not sure how I feel about that. What are your thoughts, and do you think there's any validity to the report? All right, so thanks a lot for that. And yeah, there is a story floating around right now that in No Time to Die, that James Bond gets married to the main Bond girl from not Skyfall. What was the most recent one?
Spectre, Lea Seydoux.
Yeah, Lea Seydoux from Spectre. Which raises a lot of interesting conversations. On the one hand, you know, the notion of James Bond settling down seems almost sacrilege. I get that. On the other hand, there's another side of my brain that goes, well, you know, it's actually a good logical evolution of the character. Look, the Daniel Craig James Bond, not just Daniel Craig himself, but the Daniel Craig James Bond is a character teetering on retirement, right? That's kind of been suggested and played into these movies already. And it could be a guy that's now looking differently at his life, and he believes he's found his perfect partner and decides at some point to settle down. It's actually not inconsistent when you follow this James Bond that has had a definitive story arc through his movies, which is kind of unusual for Bond. But he is a James Bond that's nearing, if not at the end of his career, and maybe looking at life a little differently. At the same time, it's James Bond. He's not supposed to settle down. So you could have that whole debate and all that and well. And I do want to get Rob's thoughts on that. But before we get to Rob's thoughts on that, the one thing that we all got to keep in mind is this. The report does not exactly come from a real credible source. All the articles that you're reading on this are all getting their story from the exact same place, which is, I believe it's the Daily Mail out of the UK. Not always wrong. Not always right. So it's questionable. So I would say a fun discussion to have, but keep this main caveat, this big asterisk floating above our heads, that I think there's a very, very solid chance that this is not true at all. It could be, might not be. But for the sake of the discussion, Rob, they have done things with this Daniel Craig Bond that they really haven't done with other Bonds in the past. And I'm saying that on the one hand, it feels weird to have him get married, but on the other hand, if I think about it, with the way they've handled this particular Bond, maybe it feels like a logical conclusion to his Bond. I don't know. As the bigger Bond fan in the room, being you, let's assume for a moment, we'll get to whether there's validity to this report in a second, but just for the sake of the discussion right now, let's assume for the moment that the report is accurate, and we're going to see James Bond get married in this film. As a lifelong Bond fan, how do you feel about that?
Well, we've seen Bond get married before.
Well, yes,
in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, he marries Teresa Bond. She becomes Teresa Bond, they have a beautiful wedding, Diana Rigg, one of the great Bond girls, and she gets assassinated by Blofeld at the end of the movie. And it's probably the most shocking ending for any Bond film. And the Bond theme comes over the end credits when over the bullet hole that was shot in the window of the car, and it's hardcore. You know, I mean, she dies, she gets killed, and then we see Bond, Roger Moore's incarnation of Bond, visiting her grave at the opening of For Your Eyes Only before he gets into the helicopter. Now, so that doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that Bond is getting married or that he is already married. What I have found strange, like you pointed out, John, in this Bond series is Casino Royale, which I loved. We saw Bond get his 00 status. And then we saw him being Bond in Quantum of Solace. And then in Skyfall, the third movie, he's lost a step. He gets shot off a train and he's hanging out getting drunk on some island before he comes back. He has to be retrained again. And in Spectre, he's like also old, which is, he's never really had a movie where he was full on James Bond. And now he's retired already. So we've sort of seen his compressed agent's life, whereas with Sean Connery, there was only when he came back and played Bond in 1983 and Never Say Never Again, they played that whole, well, you know, you're old now and blah, blah, blah. But it's sort of odd that Bond has been in this Well, he's been in his twilight years for a lot of the time he's played Bond. So I'm like, okay with it. I'm okay that he's married. Probably is married. I think the report's probably true. He's living the life. You know, he's living in Jamaica. He's retired. He's kicking it. And then he gets dragged back into the world is imperiled by Rami Malek. I'm all for it. I'm like, why shouldn't he be married? You know, I'm wondering if they'll ever acknowledge if he is married that has been married before, or it's a new continuity. Like, how are they going to play that? It's really interesting because Daniel Craig's incarnation of Bond has never been married before.
Right.
You know, so how are they going to do that? Or are they just going to pretend? I mean, Bond continuity has always been fast and loose anyway.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how it's handled. And you know what? I mean, Léa Seydoux, if you haven't seen Blue is the Warmest Color, one of my favorite, by the way, perhaps my favorite comic adaptation of all time, just saying, you should check it out.
And he's going to settle down with anybody. And listen, the funny thing is, too, is that Daniel Craig, he's still a relatively young guy. I mean, it's not like he's 70. The dude's 51 years old. So it's like he's still a relatively young dude, so it's kind of interesting playing that. Anyway, guys, question is, how do you feel about that whole thing? Would you be down? Do you even believe the report? Jump down into the comments section below and let us know your thoughts. All right.